All right, we're going to get this meeting to order. Representative Rigby, if you could lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, if the representatives could briefly introduce themselves, starting with Representative Struzzi.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I am State Representative Jim Struzzi, representing the 62nd Legislative District in Indiana County.
Good afternoon, Jill Cooper. I represent District 55, which is all encompassed in Westmoreland County.
Good afternoon, George Dunbar, Westmoreland County 56th District, western edge of the county. No offense, but the good end.
Josh Kale, Beaver, Washington Counties.
Representative Eric Nelson, Westmoreland County.
Good afternoon, Representative Jim Rigby, Cambria, Somerset Counties.
Representative Abby Major, 60th District, Armstrong, and Westmoreland Counties.
And there will be other members that are joining us online, and when they do, we will make sure we instruct them on how to do that. Representative, thank you for having us here, Representative Nelson, and even though your friends in Westmoreland County have said that this isn't the best part of Westmoreland County, it's always a blast for me to be in Westmoreland County. So the floor is yours to give a brief opening remark.
Thank you, Chairman Kale. It's an ongoing battle of which region of Westmoreland County is at the
Me all flustered
yes.
too.
But today, yeah, we're fortunate because it's a privilege to host the House Republican Policy Committee here in Westmoreland County, and our Westmoreland delegation welcomes you. I'd like to thank Hempfield Township supervisors and the supervisor building for hosting the hearing today, and the House policy staff for putting this all together and making it happen. Most importantly, I want to thank today's testifiers. You know, we're blessed to have abundant land and energy resources here in southwestern Pennsylvania. And more importantly, we are truly blessed to have outstanding work ethic, to commitment to community, the love of family, and the drive of our citizens to achieve success. This holds true with each of our testifiers today. Multi-generational businesses, farms, manufacturers, and community organizations. I think we have 2 generations, 4 generations, and 8, soon to be 9 generations farming before us today as our testifiers. And each day, these businesses struggle to stay afloat, generate profit, and to provide stability for their employees. Unfortunately, part of that struggle comes from government itself and the rules, regulations, and the permitting process that has grown so burdensome it is pushing prosperity from our state. The results are higher energy costs for all and higher food costs for families. Instead of exciting announcements like huge projects that we see happening in Ohio, Pennsylvania has seen multiple cancellations of billion-dollar projects across our state, several of those planned right here for southwestern Pennsylvania. Today, I look forward to our testifiers learning their stories and discussing how we can get those key projects, major investment, and land contracts rolling again here in Pennsylvania. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Nelson. And we have been joined by Representative Brown online. Representative Brown, thank you for being here. Make sure we keep your computer muted as we go through this hearing. It is something that's been remarked on often in the last number of hearings, as we do a lot of hearings across the Commonwealth on this subject, on energy in particular. And we have come to the conclusion, and we have seen through empirical evidence, that the world is a better place with Pennsylvania energy. And I think what we need is an energy policy coming out of Harrisburg that leverages, celebrates, and gets the most out of our natural resources, including our natural gas. It is absolutely ridiculous that someone would even talk about banning the extraction of natural gas. We get jobs from it, of course, lots of jobs across the entire region, northeast part of the state, southwest part of the state, north central part of the state. Consumers get lower prices because of it. It's kept gas down in price-wise. From a national security standpoint, it's opportunities for our country to enjoy enjoy safety because we're not dependent on other nations for our energy sources. And for our partners, it's also important across the globe for our partners to be getting natural gas from us and not from tyrants in Russia or in Iran. Across the board, it is a win. It is a win across the board for everybody, and let alone the manufacturing opportunities that come from it as well. And we could talk about, independence in manufacturing as well. But here we are still pushing off this idea that a ban on fracking, or what is really extracting natural gas out of the ground, as a consideration coming from the left. And it is just completely asinine that we would do such a self-destructive policy, but we need to talk about it because people need to understand that it's not just some hypothetical issue. This will have a dramatic impact on consumers, on workers, on national security, on international security. So I'm looking forward to hearing from the panel today on this particular subject. We have a great panel of testifiers today. We have 4 testifiers. We have Michael Hillebrand, the CEO and president of Huntley & Huntley. Thank you for being here. Amy McChesney with McChesney Farms and the Farm Bureau, right? You're also with the Farm Bureau. Thank you for being here. Randy Rodman, Government Relations Director, General Carbide Corporation, and Jeff Novers, the Executive Director of Pittsburgh Works Together. I would ask that we keep it between 3 and 5 minutes. I've never gavelled anybody out for going over, so if you go a little bit over, don't worry, but try and keep it within 3 to 5. We really enjoy the Q&A portion as well as your testimony. So, Mr. Hillebrand, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Representatives. I appreciate you all inviting me here today. Appreciate the time. We're focusing on a pretty important subject. Huntley's 1912 Allegheny County born, forever in Allegheny County to this day. My partner and I are 4th generation owners. We own Olympus Energy, the shale developer, 4th largest natural gas producer in the state of Pennsylvania, and one of the few that's privately independently owned. The area that we operate in is considered by most as Greater Pittsburgh. I think we're pretty land appropriate for the areas that we picked our construction, and being stewards of our communities is primary goal number 1. And fracking is a big part of the dialogue within most constituents. Just ignorance to what fracking even is. Fracking's been around since the 50s. I started my career right out of college working for a service company, and I worked on a truck called a blender that mixed the chemicals and the sand and the water to go through the pumps to go down high pressure. And many days I ate my lunch, hoagie and all, sitting right on top of all of the stuff that we were pumping down hole. I'm 61, other than a lot of lost hair. I have 9 healthy children, and if anybody could be affected by directly the chemicals, it would have been me, because I did that for 2 years, day in, day out, for much of my early part of my career. The misnomer understanding of fracking is there's so many factions of it that could get way too technical for most to understand. The bottom line is it's been in this industry since the 50s. In Murraysville, prior to us doing our unconventional development, had 27 conventional wells in northwest Murraysville, right up Sardis Road. Every one of those wells were fracked, and nobody had any issues. The original commercial gas well, the Haymaker well, was drilled right below my house. Andrew Carnegie got wind of it and said this stuff burns, and piped it and cleaned the air in the Turtle Creek Valley for the first time in a generation of using nat gas right from Murraysville, the start of where all this thing came, of commercial use of natural gas. So, the concerns of natural gas causing many, many different problems, the way we complete it causing many, many problems, the way that we stimulate the reservoir to get it to produce. There's a whole slew of factual technical data that would be way too long and boring for this hearing. But the empirical data is out. If you look around to our very own community, Murraysville, it is the oldest that exists with natural gas production. From orphaned wells, we have a slew of them, and houses are built on top of them somewhere here or there, and there's minimal problems throughout that entire community with people not even knowing they're there. And so the empirical evidence needs to speak to common sense for those who indoctrinate some with bad facts and quite frankly, just agendas that are really meant to slow us down.
Thank you. Ms. McChesney.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy McChesney. I am joining you today as a representative from the agricultural community. As stated, I am involved in the Farm Bureau. In some instances, I have to decide whether I am myself or I am a representative Farm Bureau. And this particular topic, I do not have to make that decision. I do not have to make that distinction because I do agree with their policies. So, to start with, I married into McChesney Farms. My husband is the 8th generation on the family farm. We are a short 12 years from being a bicentennial farm. Our children will be the 9th generation, and we are currently in a process of reinvention, as always. Most farms are constantly in a state of flux, a state of evolution, trying to stay afloat for the next generation to take over. We raise beef cattle currently. It has in the past been a dairy operation. It has in the past been sheep and goats. There has always been a hay crop, and there has always been concern about the cost of living. In recent years, we do participate in a Marcellus lease. In just the most recent history, the last couple years, we've seen a huge increase in our cost of energy, our cost of electric, our cost of fuel. These things are directly related to your cost of living. The average consumer may not understand that when plants like Homer City Generating Station are shut down and there's less electric generation to go around, that it directly affects the price of their food. If they are purchasing it directly from one of us, we may price ourselves straight out of business by trying to price our product appropriately to cover our cost of production. If they are buying it commercially, they may not understand that they are directly being affected by the cost of fuel and electric by those large distribution companies. Homer City Generating Station is a 15-minute drive from where we are, and the fallout we see in its closing goes much further than just the cost of electric. We are seeing our neighbors without job. We are seeing our neighbors, truck drivers in particular, impacted, that their families are struggling. When they struggle, our whole economy struggles. Our whole local economy struggles. Now the hot button is solar impact. Solar farms want to move in. That's that much less ground in production. Solar is one of those things where us personally and the Farm Bureau in general, it's all of the above. Whatever energy you can produce is good for all of us if it is done in a safe manner. We've learned a lot of lessons before and after Marcellus Shale about the right way to do things to protect the ground, to protect the water, to protect the residents. And we just need to continue on that path with solar. All I can say for all of this is that energy production, when it is restricted in any way, shape, or form, our local economy suffers. When Marcellus shale wells are restricted, that's royalties that are not paid to the landowner, and that is money that does not come into our local economy, and those are families who continue to struggle more and more and more as they pay higher and higher electric and fuel bills.
Thank you. Mr. Rodman.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And General Carbide would like to thank Representative Eric Nelson and the policy staff and you all here today for letting us testify. General Carbide is right up the road here. We have 4 facilities here. General Carbide is a 56-year-old company that is located here in Hempfield. It is a second-generation, family-owned and operated business by Mona Papafava Ray. Her father started the business in '68. He built it, and then she took over in '97. General Carbide currently has 250 employees and about 120,000 square feet under roof. General Carbide employees follow 5 core values. We believe we're all family. We believe in growth. We believe in integrity, excellence of work, and dedication. That's what we follow every day. By following these core values, General Carbide continues to be a leader in the industry with our employees and in the community. General Carbide has received numerous awards throughout the years for leadership in the community, currently receiving the Business of the Year award from Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. Employees serve many community boards because we believe in giving back to others. Current areas of emphasis: workforce development, all the high school initiatives to bring young people into manufacturing, helping other manufacturers with resources. Thank you for letting me share those little backgrounds about General Carbide. What we're looking for is sustainable energy. I'm going to give you a little story about just what happened a few years ago. I'm going to start by sharing General Carbide's. A few years ago, General Carbide completed a $10 million upgrade by adding an additional building here in the industrial park. Again, we have 4 buildings right around this location. It was our 4th building. It had a 51,000 square feet of production space. This upgrade would also house another $5 to $10 million with investment of equipment. The building was located at the end of a 25 kV line. After the equipment was moved, the production was started, we began having power outages. West Penn was notified. The inspector line said nothing was wrong. Please understand that when new equipment is added, new equipment means equipment that has computers, computer boards that are very sensitive to power, hard stops, and power fluctuations. Within the first year, we had 9 power outages. General Carbide lost over $250,000 of equipment and product. After having a handful of meetings with West Penn Power, their only solution was to upgrade to a 25 kV line. That sounds simple enough, except the cost would fall on General Carbide Corporation. We would be responsible for 10 to 12 power line pole replacements, power cable replacements, replacement of a new 12 kV transformer at our new building with a new 25 kV transformer, which was less than a year old, replacing transformers in 2 other buildings with 25 kV, pay all the overtime that West Penn would occur, etc. The total cost was going to be $500,000 plus. Thanks to the Republican caucus and the leaders in the caucus that we have here in Westmoreland County, General Carbide was able to reduce those costs to less than $200,000. Since we've done the upgrade, we've only had 2 outages, both of them dealing with accidents. Over the past year, we've also seen our energy costs double in price. We have been blessed in this region to have very stable and affordable energy. First, we had coal-fired power plants and lived in an area with plenty of coal production. Currently, we have clean, burning, gas-generated power plants with an abundance of natural gas located in this region. It is extremely important to businesses in this area to have sustainable energy costs so that we can compete on the world stage. So let's use the natural resources that we have in the area for our advantage. Thank you.
Mr. Nobers.
Chairman Kell, thank you. Members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Nobers. I'm the Executive Director of Pittsburgh Works Together. We are an alliance of organized labor, businesses, and economic development professionals. We have a special interest in what we consider to be our foundational industries, energy, manufacturing, and construction. And we believe that keeping those industries strong and making them stronger is critical to a thriving economy for the Commonwealth as well as here locally. The other speakers today have talked a bit about the impact of regulations and red tape on fracking and the gas industry itself. What I'm going to talk about is the downstream economic impacts of those government actions and others like them, because the battle against fracking is part of a wider attack on the fossil fuels that power modern society. 20 years ago, the U.S. was facing a crisis of a lack of energy. We were increasingly dependent on imports. We were building LNG terminals to bring gas in. Now today, we are the largest energy producer in the world. And that's because of Marcellus and Utica gas, because of fracking. And that is what has allowed us to turn this corner. And now the terminals we built that used to import gas are being used to export our LNG all over the world. And the U.S., through the use of natural gas replacing coal in many respects, is the only country that's meeting the Paris Climate Accords, and we have cut carbon emissions more than any other country on the face of the earth. Now, the battle against fracking and other attacks on fossil fuels threaten to really just turn that all upside down. Unfortunately, we may see what happens when policymakers start to tinker with complex systems that they really don't fully understand. Last month, we issued a report called The PJM Grid in Peril: What Will Keep the Lights On? We analyzed the threats to the electric grid largely because of hostility to hydrocarbons. As we know, Pennsylvania is an electricity powerhouse. We export more electricity than any other state. Our power comes from these sources: 54% from natural gas, 32% from nuclear, and 10% from coal. That is 96% of the power we generate from those three sources. The other 4% comes from a little bit of wind, a little bit of solar, a little bit of hydro, and in fact, according to the latest data from the Pennsylvania State Electricity Profile, November of 23, and this is issued by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, we burn more wood for electric power than we get from solar in Pennsylvania. As an energy powerhouse, we have an impact far beyond our borders. We produce about 30% of the electricity for the PJM grid, and that covers 65 million people in all or parts of 13 states and Washington, D.C. We directly power about 7% of the U.S. GDP, and we mostly do it using fracked natural gas. Earlier this year, the EPA issued new greenhouse gas regulations for fossil fuel plants. They'll require all existing coal plants that use existing standard technology to shut down by 2032. Last year, those plants produced 17% of the country's power. Not just our power, the country's power. The EPA regulations also ban any new natural gas baseload generating plants that use conventional technology. Instead, the regulations will require capturing the carbon emissions, storing them underground, and that's a technology that's never been proven to work at scale for natural gas power plants. Meanwhile, here in Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro proposed electricity legislation that would fundamentally change the grid as well. The PACER proposal would put a new tax on electricity produced from fossil fuels. And as we know, when we tax something, we tend to get less of it. Further, he's requiring that by 2035, 50% of Pennsylvania's electricity must come from wind, solar, hydro, and other alternative sources, including the infamous technology that doesn't even exist today. Keep in mind that coal, gas, and nuclear today account for more than 96% of our production. The rest is 4%. All this forced change is coming as we put new demands on the electric grid, from artificial intelligence to data centers to electric vehicles to home heating. The combination of increased demand and pressure to shut down the fossil fuel plants that provide most of PJM's power has the grid operator warning of shortages by 2030 or earlier. We're already seeing the impact. The power auction PJM held in July to cover the 25 to 26 period will result in some customers paying as much as 24% more for power next year. We have yet to see the analysis of how the auction will impact Pennsylvania customers. I'll conclude with just two observations. First, we should support and advance innovative technology. We believe in an all-of-the-above energy strategy. If we can produce electricity with less environmental impact, we should. But we need to ensure those technologies are as reliable and affordable as the existing sources that we would replace before we start putting plans in motion. Hoping things work out is not a sound strategy here. And that brings me to my second observation. We don't have a coherent energy policy in Pennsylvania. We don't have one in the country. What we have is a hodgepodge of laws and rules and regulations and ideas and goals and executive orders that often work at cross purposes with each other. Energy is too important to leave to chance. We need to develop a rational, realistic, data-driven, comprehensive policy that accounts for the constraints of the real world if we want to facilitate an energy transition that makes things better and not worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Nelson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank each of the testifiers from your different perspectives. Trying to connect, some of the dots and the work that the policy committee has done throughout areas of the states. And the testimony today threw me back to, I think it was last month, we were underground at a coal mine just in 2 counties over, and how the coal industry is booming, how they're busting at the seams and exporting coal to India and China, and how China's building a new coal-fired power plant every 2 weeks. I'd like to start my question really at the beginning of our testifier, because Mr. Hildebrand, as that, the source of energy production, I know, in Pennsylvania, we're eyeing data centers. We just had 3 quarters ago, $1 billion power plant about 20 minutes from here get canceled. How do you see the connection between reliable power, data center investment, and the energy industry here in Pennsylvania?
Thank you, Representative Nelson, and thank you for the testimony. Dead nuts on many of the issues. Yes, we're not a business-friendly state. Yes, there's regulation through the roof. Yes, there's frivolous lawsuits that test the laws in place that go all the way to the Supreme Court, in our case 3 times. It's a very difficult state to operate in, and it's known for that, when considering other states for certain things. The PGM facts are real. Since 2008 to current, there's been very little electric demand going on throughout the country. And from 24, 25 forward to 30, there's 2.5% growth across the country happening in the face of shutting down reliable coal and gas throughout the country, as we just formally heard. Much of that future growth is not just the electrification of the world, switching from fossil fuels, appliances, cars, but the bulk of it is coming from the future of AI data centers. They're behemoth electric generation burns. A simple data center may be 400 megawatts, which is a significant electric generator for most communities. Its natural gas demand is significant. And yet, when you look at where the data centers are, they're coastal. Most of them are coastal because to go across the oceans, it means fiber, digital, rather than laying any kind of electric transmission lines. Most data centers are coastal, and the biggest ones are Virginia, Georgia, and New York State. And so when the Metas, the Googles, the Amazons of the world are looking at where do we put data centers, they go to where's my most cheap, reliable energy. They look at Ohio, they look at Pennsylvania. Ohio's getting it. Ohio's having discussions. We've had discussions with some of the most ESG conservative entities in the West Coast, looking at a void that the only way I can fulfill this is through the use of clean burning natural gas. When you look at how much natural gas is needed in this neck of the woods for demand, we can't get gas out of here. We talked about LNG. The biggest threat is not fracking. It's not the 1.5 years of permit lengths and all of the frivolous lawsuits. The biggest problem is they figured out if we have the healthiest heart in the world, if you shut down the arteries to get it out of here, it's not going to get out of here. The system's going to die. And so we've literally become a milk farm that's making too much milk and dumping half of it over the field for the value of our product. And the biggest help we can get is how do we get our gas to market? And if we can't get it out of here, how do we bring market rate on top of it? And we're looking at some of the most sophisticated balance sheet companies in the country and the world looking to invest right into this state, right on top of the cheapest natural gas, who are afraid to come here for many of the non-business thoughts that they have for entering this platform and going elsewhere.
So bridging that gap, they're building them in Virginia, but we supply the power to Virginia.
The idea would be is the data centers are here. They build their own dedicated nat gas units in redundancy, to which if there was some kind of a 400 megawatt plant is there to support a large data center. Digitally, 1/70th of the cost to lay a fiber cable than it is to lay electric transmission lines from Texas, where there's green energy that can't get here because the transmission lines are not reliable. It's 1/70th of the cost to lay a fiber line from Pennsylvania to Virginia or fiber line to New York or Georgia. Their model is much easier that if we have to transport data, don't bring the electric to the data centers, generate it here, and we'll send the data through the channels that they have in place, which are fiber cables. And so the idea is they want to build the data centers here right on top of the cheapest, cleanest burning fuel, a huge market for this industry. In redundancy, they need backup, like the cracker plant. The cracker plant has 380 megawatt generators out there, 2 of which run all the time, and 1 is backup if one goes down. There's got to be some common sense going on here within our energy policy of if data centers come and they're having excess power just for their own backup, and we need PJM power, we ought to be thinking holistic about how do we invite these industries here, break the barriers down to bring that industry here, and maybe attract the Googles, Metas, and Microsoft or Amazons to be headquartered in, or have a division in Pittsburgh someday. So, that's one aspect that I see within the starvation of our industry. Markets, markets, markets. We're pouring milk over the hill, in my analogy. It's so inexpensive to the wellhead. Royalty owners are suffering from not production, but low price. It's trickling down everywhere. Capital is leaving this state for the upstream. Rate of return competes across the country. Texas is, you can build a location in a day, you can get a permit in a day, and you can spit to a pipeline and get a permit in a week for that. We go through years of trying to get things completed to just develop our competing capital versus other states is up against much, and they have markets too. We're blessed with the best rock in the country. It's our only advantage, and every Mission Impossible goal that we could put on top of it to mess it up, we have done.
I know I have more questions, but Mr. Chair, I'll hand it back over because I know other members are waiting.
Representative Struzzi.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate all of you being here today, your testimony. I think you mentioned common sense, and I think that's severely lacking here in Pennsylvania. And I know that a number of us up here have been fighting against these really foolhardy regulations for a number of years, all the way back to the Wolf administration with the Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So we certainly understand where you're coming from. And I was driving down here from Indiana County and coming down 119, and I saw the Homer City Generating Station just sitting there. It's cold. It's not creating any electricity. You mentioned the PJM numbers. I don't know how people in Pennsylvania or people in this country are going to be able to afford anything if energy costs increase that dramatically. But they're going to because of these ridiculous policies that shut down the fossil fuel industry, shut down energy production. And I know we only have an hour, and I don't want to go on and on, but I certainly can because, we share your frustration. You mentioned the policies that are in place, the long permitting processes, the basic. You look at the map that shows all the investment that has left this Commonwealth, and it's not funny. It's not a joke. It's not anecdotal. It's real. What do you see? I guess I want to have you paint a picture for me. What does Pennsylvania look like 5 years from now if we take 2 different courses? If we were able to change our energy policy, which we don't have right now, which you mentioned, 5 years from now, what could Pennsylvania look like if we changed our policies to be pro-energy production? And conversely, what does it look like if we don't change course?
It's a crack crystal. It's a crack crystal ball prophecy for sure. But if I look at, jurisdictionally, to just get a permit to drill for, the Marcellus Shale well, fully believe in community engagement. It's in their backyard. They should have the right to be where that is. And we work hard to work with our community leaders to make sure that our existence coexists with the communities. Within that becomes the state's jurisdiction will then start writing in, you need to get municipal approval. And there's no law even backing up some of these things. They'll just start sticking conditions within your permits that if that's a problem in that neck of the woods, then we better make sure we cover our butt and introduce that. So, things get stretched in this cross-jurisdictional world within our state that's different than most, that keeps growing. And it's making it difficult for us to do what we do. But the market side of this is really our biggest problem. And if things don't change, I would see there's probably 2 shale operators on the largest supply of natural gas in the country that will just keep status quo of whatever the pipelines can deliver and whatever new markets come. We can't exist at this kind of price environment for year after year after year. And so if things don't change and there's no industry and there's no support to get market and demand, look for massive consolidation and job loss and G&A centers of 1 or 2 that are supplying, 30% of the country's natural gas supply. Conversely, if we're to endorse the fact that natural gas is the cleanest burning fossil fuel and invite industry that needs it, uses it, all the way to AI, to power generation, endorsing them to what are we chasing after when this is the one that worked and lower our carbon emissions, displacing coal. I'm not against coal. I mean, it has its applications as well, but we have an empirical result of cleaning our own air to where it works. Let's just bring that to our state. Let's allow the world's dirtiest coal, which is Germany, India, China, to be displaced by U.S. clean-burning natural gas and balance our deficits. These are just common sense things that to build a single pipeline, Equitrans MVP, it's twice over budget and took 3 years to construct. It was supposed to be a year. And they canceled another one just because of the lawsuits and fractions coming in. These are the factions out there that are a few minority pushing an agenda that is worse for this entire country than I can imagine. We're imploding ourselves over giving that traction force to some that just see it for no other way that common sense doesn't justify.
Thank you. I won't take up too much more time, but just want to note that it has been about a year since the Homer City Generating Station shut down. I wonder how much that's affected global warming. Probably not at all, because they're building coal-fired electric generation plants in other parts of the world. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, and we need to stop. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some of the things I wanted to ask have already been covered, but I do feel some of them bear repeating. What we deal with in Harrisburg, I've been here 14 years and 5 years before that as a local elected official here. And by then, all you heard about is all the dangers of fracking, how the world was going to explode, how everything was going to go. And all these red herrings that never came to be. They never came to be. So the only thing we've done in Harrisburg, we did Act 13 like 12 years ago, I guess it was. But we really haven't done a whole lot outside of that. But now the arguments have changed from worried about fracking, and now the discussion is more on transmission lines, like you had mentioned. Just cut off the head, and you can't deliver the product. It's not beneficial to do it. And what we're seeing right now is that red herring of the dangers of transmission lines. So, Amy, in your farms, you have both fracking and transmission lines. Is there some greater danger of transmission lines? Or is this another red herring?
We haven't noticed any. We do have a neighbor who had an explosion on their farm over on 819. The Gillis farm experienced an explosion. It was an oddity, flaw in the pipe. It didn't have anything to do with the industry itself or the transmission lines themselves. It had to do with maintenance. Lesson learned. They have come up with better ways to maintain those pipes and to survey them for those types of flaws. Problem solved. If I might have a moment, what will Pennsylvania look like if the energy issues aren't addressed? I'm going to tell you there's going to be fewer farms. A 24% increase in our electric bill is not sustainable for most of us. In the industry we're in our business model we're in, I just adjust my prices. Last week, 2 weeks ago, we had an event where a dairy farmer said they actually do not know what they are paid. They don't know. So you're going to see fewer and fewer of them if they have to try to cover a cost like that. And when you see fewer and fewer farms, currently we're at 1.5% of the population feeds the other 98.5%. The definition of food insecurity is, can your household sustain a surprise $400 bill that you weren't expecting? That statistic, that number came from something back in the 70s. It was the average cost of a major car repair. Today, the average cost of a major car repair is somewhere over $1,200. So can you, in your household, sustain a surprise $1,200 bill? If you can't, you're experiencing food insecurity already. So how many people can't sustain that? Are we there already? Is it going to get worse? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And look, I said we haven't done a whole lot legislatively at all, especially when you talk about the bureaucracy. But what we're seeing right now is there was mention about permitting taking forever, things like that. And the governor's proposal last year was, if you don't get it done in time, we'll give you your money back. Big deal. You should do that anyhow. We need to have more discussions as far as deemed approval and things like that. This isn't getting done on time. Mr. Nobers, do you have any comments on that?
Well, Pittsburgh Works has pushed for deemed approved on these permits really in the 5 years that we've existed. We don't really see where there's a problem with a third-party review. Someone signing their professional name on the line, verifying that the permit is appropriate and should be issued. To the governor's proposal, I was talking to Senator Yaw, whom I'm sure you all know, and we were talking about the money-back guarantee, and he said, well, maybe it should be a 10 times your money-back guarantee or something like that. You have to make it punitive. I mean, what's the incentive for people that work in that bureaucracy to do anything differently if there's no punitive action for it? So what? You give some money back. I think deemed approved is the only appropriate way to go. And really, I don't know why it's so feared, because if we are actually approving permits faster today, which we are told we are, if the process is working better, which we're told it is, then it should never get to the point where you need deemed approved. So you should have that in there as your backstop and really your punitive point of a permit review.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to note that Chairwoman Oberlander and Representative Schern have joined us online as well. Representative Cooper.
Thank you for your testimony. I really appreciate it. I know a lot has been covered. I guess one of the questions, Michael, you had mentioned earlier, I live in Murraysville as well, and I remember Act 12, and I remember, the overlay districts, and it's, we're in a local municipality here, and the impact that local government has on your businesses. And so you had mentioned education. And, I'd like to just throw that question out to you and the panel. Is there more that we can do to help working with our local municipalities? All of us here have forged strong relationships with our elected officials and, to educate the community. I think George had mentioned that I remember back when I was being supportive back in 2010 and 12, and I kept thinking in the back of my head, oh my, what if one of these blow up, right? And there goes the whole industry. And recently, being a new freshman in the legislature, I was able to tour the fracking pads, and they are just phenomenal. What has happened in the last 10 years from a safety standpoint. I don't think you can find a better construction site, out there that has followed laws and regulations. It was just really quite eye-opening to tour and see all the improvements and the safety that was there. And I went on a tour with a lot of folks who, were more skeptical. And so I encourage anyone who comes to our office with questions or concerns to take those tours, as a way of educating. I'm just wondering, from the standpoint of your being in business, anything that we can do to enhance that education process.
Yes, education is the key because, to the layperson, this could be just glorified and brought up, and you can find anything you want on the web that just endorses an idea that may have been shared or indoctrinated. And so factual education is where things need to be. And, I'm chairman of PIOGA. We're a member of MST. I'm chairman of the board of IPAA. All three of those, IPAA is nationally, and MSC and PIOGA locally. All three of those charters are very much about education. And if there's resources needed or to be directed, a link to the IPAA Energy in Depth or the MSC or PIOGA, there is all kinds of educational information available. On my webpage, we provide educational videos of how things are just done. So it's really, how do you get the people to look for the right resources? And it's really communicating that out. You're getting the word out, because most people just drive about, do their business. A lot of the opportunities that we get to educate is within community action at council meetings, which I fully believe and are committed to, of where's the appropriate land use for our activities and getting the community's input. There's opportunities in those windows to educate well, but education will be the key. It's not happening in our high schools, colleges, community college, trade schools. It's just not happening.
Does anybody else have anything to add there, Jeff?
Well, I would just say on top of that, the groups that are opposed to fracking, opposed to this industry, are very well organized. I'll give them credit where it's due. They're highly organized. They're very well funded, in many cases by foundations in the Pittsburgh region that, purport to want to solve social justice issues, that they fund things that destroy the economy, which is how you actually solve your social issues. So they are not easy to compete against, and I think you're absolutely right. We have a lot of educational material there as well, and it is a battle to get them there. We also represent some of the construction trades. Just to get a teacher in high school to talk to kids about going into construction, and that's sort of benign. We're not asking them to talk about something they may disagree with. So that is definitely probably our biggest challenge.
All right. I'm going to ask a couple questions, unless anyone else has some, and we can open it back up after the questions that I have. A frustration of mine, and I'm just going to touch on this before I get into the questions that I'm asking, is this permitting issue. And we talked about deemed approved. And I like the note that this permitting issue should not, 100% should not be an issue that the legislature is dealing with. The executive should handle its own affairs. And if the governor really wanted permitting reform, he could snap his fingers and do an executive order and say, these permits are going to be approved within 30 days. And if they're not, then you start firing people. The governor has the authority to fix this overnight. They act like they need us in the process so they have someone else to blame, and we are stepping in to fix it because this governor, the governor before him, the governor before him, the governor before him, and probably the governor all the way back to 1924, whenever this nonsense started, has bungled up the whole permitting process in Pennsylvania. And it's not just this industry. And we've heard this from manufacturers, we've heard this from farmers. I had a hearing a year ago where PennDOT was complaining about DEP's permitting process. You had one agency complaining about another agency's permitting process. Let's not forget, the governor is the head of the administrative state. And if he wants to fix this, he can fix it now. With that being said, we recognize that it is a serious problem and it will be a top agenda item once we do retake the majority. But I think we need to make it clear that this is his mess, and we're cleaning it up, and we'll do that. But it's his mess that has started in the governor. So let me get off my high horse and actually start talking about what we're talking about here today, because that is definitely a frustration that I have. Mr. Hillebrand, your company, you guys do conventional and unconventional. Is that correct, or just mainly unconventional?
We did about 800 wells conventionally, 400 here in Pennsylvania from 98 to 2008. And when the winds changed towards unconventional, we're out of the conventional space and only doing unconventional.
And I just want to ask a couple of technical questions about hydraulic fracturing. We call it fracking, and it gets kind of this bad name, but really it's just extracting natural gas out of the ground. When you guys drill a hole into the ground, how deep are you going down?
These particular wells in Westmoreland County, it's the Marcellus is about 7,000 feet deep, and the Utica is 13 to 14,000 feet deep.
And where is the water? Where's the water basin?
Freshwater table stops in this neck of the woods around 800 feet.
And when you drill a hole, is the hole have casing? How does that work? Can you explain that?
Yeah, each different well is designed with certain protective strings of casing. Sometimes you're drilling through an open abandoned coal mine, sometimes an active coal mine. Each one of those layers of either active, inactive to protect the coal resource, casing string ran. If a freshwater zone is above the coal seam that people are using, another string of casing is ran to that. If a freshwater source is being used deeper than the coal, then three strings of pipe can be ran, all to protect the freshwater resources, and they're concentric. You start out larger and go smaller and smaller. So each string you run protects not twice, but on the shallowest one 3 times for protecting those sources of water. Beyond that, in this neck of the woods, there's an intermediate string ran to about 2,400 feet deep. That is the last source of any kind of water. There's a zone that's slightly brackish, just over 1,000 part per million chlorides. That it too is not a freshwater source, but shut off and protected from any deeper hydrocarbon contamination. And then the last string of pipe is the one that we produce through, and that's usually 5.5 inches casing in diameter and an 8 3/4 inch hole. And that all of those are cemented back up over the horizons that we're looking to protect.
And so you drill the hole, you put the casing on it, the waterbed's protected. You go down with the wireline services and you fracture the shell, and then you send water down with sand, with like usually 100 mesh sand in this region, and that keeps the holes open so you can extract more gas out. And that's basically the whole fracking process. Now, you mentioned chemicals as well. These chemicals that go down the hole, now I'm not going to ask you what they are because I know that that's, a lot's been made of this, but they're more or less things that you find in your cleaning supplies, correct?
They have very fearful names that just rhyme with fracking somehow, but typically if you look at the back of dishwater or dish soap and look at the phosphates that are in there, they're the same chemistry names that are used within the surfactants we use sending down holes. So yes, all of that we're very transparent about as well. We communicate and open up what we're using to go downhole. Beyond the chemicals, something else to know that the Marcellus in this neck of the woods, from the recycled treated water that we put down the hole, which mostly comes from other frac jobs and co-ops with other companies, what we get back on a Marcellus is about 22% of the water we put in we get back. And so on a Utica well, it's about 12%. And so the amount of chemicals going in, coming back out is a much smaller fraction to then be used in the next cycle of aggregating people's treated water to go down that well. So, it's not like this thing comes back one for one, that we're worried about. We treated all of this, and now what do we do for these large volumes of chemical-induced water? There's another technical issue that very few people know within the rock mechanics. In Bradford, Venango County, if you frack in those neck of the woods, the rock matrix is such that the overburden is not the strongest stress, to where all of their fracks pancake. They're flat horizontal pancakes. And so the rock mechanics in this neck and throughout the country, at some point the overburden is enough pressure to stop it from pancaking to then go angle and then a vertical frac. And so even if a frac were to communicate from our shallowest zones that we used to do in Murraysville at 2,300 feet, those were vertically. If we were to go up around 2,000 feet, the thing pancakes out and can't go any further up the hole due to the overburden stresses that work with the rock mechanics of how hydraulics and applying the hydraulic pressure works. Now, that's very little known, but that's a reality of one of the facts that needs to be discussed with. What are these things going to do if they come to surface?
Well, let me ask you this, and I want to. You've mentioned the fracking. I think it's been around since like the 1940s or something, as it relates to unconventional wells, the conventional side is kind of a little bit of a different process. But as it relates to unconventional wells, if there was no hydraulic fracturing in this process, how many more pads would you see? How much less production would you see?
Zero. Shale is packed organic mud, kind of like coal. It's where the hydrocarbons are generated, because all the organics in this silty, clay, yucky. If you have a backyard full of yucky clay and shale, and the other half is full of sand, when it rains, this would just be non-draining, sitting there with mosquitoes 2 months later. The sand would drain. This reservoir is just nothing but packed organic mud that cooks with time and temperature and pressure, that gives off the hydrocarbons. It will not drain unless we can hydraulically stimulate it, causing fractures.
Thank you for that. And Mr. McChesney, you mentioned something earlier that it has always fascinated me, because my district is the western part of Washington County and the western part of Beaver County. There's natural gas extraction occurring across the entire district. And I got to tell you, one of the major issues in my district, if I was not supportive of the industry, I'd be voted out pretty quickly. And that's a pretty good indication as far as where the community is at on the issue. I find it deeply concerning that all the opposition of this industry comes from places that have no idea where Claysville is. There's no idea where Beaver is, and where Bentleyville is. And then on top of that, they go ahead and start mandating or incentivizing solar panels that now we're finding in certain areas aren't the most popular setups in and of themselves. And I'm not suggesting that we go to war against solar or anything like that. I'm just noting what's happening within our communities. Don't you think that if this were really, truly a problem, that the local constituency would be the ones that would be complaining the most around the natural gas industry?
I do. And I think at the beginning of the Marcellus shale wave, you saw that. You saw people who were scared the same way you do about solar right now. They're like, what's going to happen to our ground? What's going to happen to our water? And they were scared. They were scared about the chemicals. I think once they understood how deep these wells were, some of those concerns went away. Because anyone who has dug here knows that there's limestone. Once you get so far down, nothing's coming through that limestone. You're going to spend a lot of money trying to dig a trench through that limestone. So in essence, it's not as scary once they look at the whole picture. I think we'll see the same thing with solar. And I understand the area you're coming from. If you drive through Washington, you drive through Beaver, there are more big trucks on the road with drill rig equipment in them than not. And if that industry stops, how many people lose their jobs? How many people can't feed their families? And guess who won't get reelected?
Well, and when I was born, the unemployment rate in Beaver County was 26%. So we understand the value of a job. That was just a generation ago. I'm not that old. I mean, it's just a generation ago. And this industry, it came in and has put a lot of food on people's tables in an area that just has not seen that type of activity. And then I want to close with questions for you, Mr. Nobers. I'm not going to let you go here without asking you a couple questions as well. You had mentioned the energy transition, and I actually hate that term. I'm sorry. I know it's a term that's commonly used. Maybe there's an energy reformation out there coming when you talk about carbon capture and potentially hydrogen, but this idea, and it's become a major frustration for me. Mr. Hillebrand mentioned Carnegie, I believe, in his remarks. And Carnegie didn't open up his mills in Western Pennsylvania because of a tax credit program. It wasn't some government subsidy, right? It was because there was coal here, and there was access to market here. There was a workforce here. There was the ability to get that produced goods to the markets across the United States, out of Western Pennsylvania. And it was really natural resources that started this. It was the coal out of Connellsville and all that stuff. Today, the government is trying to dictate what markets we're playing in. And I just don't see this being successful. In fact, I think it's going to be a massive waste of money. Jimmy Carter had solar panels put on the White House roof in the 1970s. And solar has not come along that far. Every 10 years we hear, oh, it's coming, next generation, solar's going to be it, solar's going to be it. What are we doing? What are we doing? Every time we put what I call green tariff on our manufacturers, we are creating incentive for Chinese pollution. Every time we incentivize and drive up the costs and incentivize solar panels and wind, making electricity more expensive, we're telling our manufacturers, don't build here. We're telling Wall Street, there's obstacles here, go invest in China and India. Are there environmental regulations in those places? How is their pollution going the last couple of years?
Well, I think as we've always said, where would you rather have the product manufactured and care about the environment, in the United States or China and India? They have little, if any, regulation. Representative Nelson mentioned earlier the volume of coal plants being built in China. It's also in India. It's also in Africa. The only way to grow and stimulate an economy is to have reliable energy. And wind and solar is about the most expensive. So a third world country that's seeking to improve is not going to go the wind and solar route. They're going to go the coal route or the natural gas route. And that's just simple economics. We have invested, I can't even imagine, billions doesn't begin to scratch the surface in wind and solar over the decades. And we sit here today with two technologies that should be part of energy generation, but are not the solution to what people see as a problem. They are unreliable. They can't deliver base load. Download the PJM app on your smartphone. Go there and look at fuel mix any hour of the day, and you will see that solar and wind seldom, if ever, account for more than 7 or 8% of the energy being generated onto the PJM grid. And at night, forget about it, because obviously there's no sun and little wind. And I think that's the other point. We're trying to force fit a technology into areas. Let's even say solar worked perfectly. Solar's not going to work in southwestern Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, we have too many cloudy days. Wind wouldn't be real viable here. Now, Hawaii, maybe. Nevada, maybe. But the simple fact still remains that they are unreliable technologies after all these years of investment. And I think that's the most bothersome thing is, here in Pennsylvania through, the initial road of RGGI and now, the reintroduction of challenging RGGI and the stated clean energy goals and so forth, companies have decided they're not going to invest in gas-fired power plants. They're looking for a 50-year return when they build these plants. And they're sitting here today with, the government in Pennsylvania and the governor saying, well, yeah, but by 2035, we're probably going to shut that down. And then on top of it, the EPA is saying even sooner. So who would invest that money? So we're eliminating generation, we're increasing demand, and the end result's going to be higher rates. It's that simple.
Yeah, so a statistic that you're mentioning, $9 trillion the world has invested in renewable energy in the last 20 years, and it's gone from 3% to 4% of production. So it's marginal production. It's just, it completely frustrates me, and I'm done with my questions. So I'm sorry for taking up so much time. But it does completely frustrate me that our biggest blessing, our natural resources, which should be converted into lower costs for consumers, which should be converted into more manufacturing assets, which should be converted to national security and a better environment, is treated as our greatest curse. And instead, we're importing Chinese-produced energy with solar panels and windmills that are created with coal-fired plants and creating all kinds of a carbon footprint through it. And by the way, it doesn't really work. And we are paying more and getting less, and we're hurting the environment in the process. It is completely asinine, especially for us in Pennsylvania, where we have such rich natural resources. So, yes, sir, Mr. Rodman.
One of the things I failed to mention that General Carbide, our largest single customer is oil and gas. We make, carbide is the second hardest to diamond. So the drill tips and stuff use our materials, to do the drilling. So, and that money, those are orders coming from Texas and those areas. So we make, a single largest customer is oil and gas. The market is our second largest. Okay, so those are employing several of our own people at General Carbide.
And that's what it's about. It's about jobs, right? It's about jobs. Representative Nelson, you said you had a couple questions here.
Yeah, and that's a great segue, because to me, I'm an all-of-the-above energy guy, and I'm all about the jobs. So it's frustrating to see lost opportunity in data centers, closed power plants, but really, I think we have a responsibility to make sure that our existing employers are able to be supported and sustained, and that includes both the agriculture industry, our manufacturers. Mr. Rodman, you mentioned a 50% increase in energy costs just within these last few years. Going back to Representative Struzzi's question on two different directions, what's the consequence of another 50% energy? We heard 25% is already anticipated through the PJM grid that will start in July of next year, increase in energy. How does that impact your manufacturing decisions? Because you have hundreds of employees, you operate in multiple states. When our energy skyrockets the way that it does, how does that impact your multi-million-dollar business?
You have every new machine you buy, is, using more and more energy, and as we, increase the size of our floor space and that kind of stuff, and adding additional machines to meet our production demands, it drives the cost up. And, there's only X amount when you're competing worldwide with China or, other countries that, are getting cheap energy, because of using coal and that kind of stuff that we can't use anymore. But one of the areas of Western Pennsylvania has been blessed with has been a steady and stable, fairly stable energy price. But again, we're all eating it and dealing with it. Pennsylvania is not as bad as some other areas. I mean, we have a place in Massachusetts. We have a place in Hawaii. Hawaii is 8 times the cost of energy here. But what we were doing is looking at moving some of that back, to this area. We looked at it a couple of years ago about bringing a facility here, one of 5 in the world that makes silicon carbide, and there's only 5 companies in the world that make this. And we looked at locating it here in Hemphill. Because of the energy cost, the water cost, the utility cost, all those areas, we're blessed, to have it. But we're still feeling the pain when you double the price of energy, and you triple the price of energy. So it affects every manufacturer.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's a bit foreboding. When we talk about opportunity loss, which was the original overall theme of this hearing, it takes me, my last question goes to Mrs. McChesney, and the 25% energy costs and the increase in food. When you touched on the food deserts, in our family text about an hour before the hearing, our kid number 4 sent out. He lives in Pittsburgh. $20 for him, and he sent a picture. It was $20 for a loaf of bread, a thing of bananas, 1 dozen eggs, and a jar of peanut butter. $9 for a jar of peanut butter. So, from your perspective of making the food that everyone needs and seeing those increases in energy costs, what does a robust land lease that's paying your farm operations a monthly fee, whether it's in oil or it's in gas, how does that impact your 9th generation to be able to stay and survive? I know farms in this area of Hempfield, multi-thousand acre wolf group, the land lease was lost. It wasn't renewed because there was no incentive for the companies, too burdensome to drill. Many of those farms have gone in other directions. They're not farming anymore. How do you look at that future between increased energy costs and decrease, revenue streams that you rely on for your operation?
So there's all kinds of hidden implications there. Mr. Hillebrand and I were just quietly discussing that fertilizer costs are directly affected by the gas industry. This year we spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,000 on fertilizer. As far as your question, we have a lease with Marcellus Shale that at its height we would receive, we have 112 acres. All of our acreage is considered in production. We have shutout clauses that if for some reason they can't get that gas to market, aren't able to pay us within a certain number of days, they are penalized by our lease, or they need to shut it down and decommission it, and that is something none of us want. By the same token, our lease allows for the lease to stay in effect with the same restrictions if they decide to come back and drill deeper and into the Onondaga where we believe there is oil. The Onondaga Shale is the closest to the surface it gets anywhere here in our region, Washington County, Westmoreland County. It's as close to the surface as it is, correct?
I'll let you go.
So we were hopeful that whenever they get done with the Marcellus Shale, they would be back quickly to do that it would be a steady stream of income to carry us into the next generation and the generation after that. Our current checks, the worst they've been is around $130 instead of the $1,300 that they had been. We are now 12, 13 years into our lease. It should have been time to come back and redo the horizontals to refrac. They should have been back by now. They haven't been. So we will see that number continue to decrease and decrease and decrease with what they are able to pull out. If the payments were to stop, I would expect they would have to cap the wells and be gone. And there's a revenue lost. That revenue gets put straight back into our local economy. I mean, the closest to out of state we get is driving out to Cabela's in Morgantown, or not Morgantown, Wheeling. That's the closest we get to being out of state. Like the money that is paid to landowners here by Marcellus Shale and similar, it stays here. That is what bolsters our Western Pennsylvania economy.
All right. Representative, if you'd like to give some closing remarks here, and I'll close it up, and we'll go from there.
Right back at me, I guess. Here. Well, thank you. A genuine thank you to each of our testifiers today. Really compelling story about each of your businesses, the opportunity that lays before us, and also a very solid reality of peril if we don't take action and start to right the course. And that opportunity is before us. So I truly appreciate the policy committee coming to Westmoreland County. I appreciate the members coming out today, and I'll hand that back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you for having us here in your district. Really appreciate your hospitality. Mr. Hillebrand, something else that you said caught my attention. You'd mentioned you had 9 children. Well, I'm one of 7, and I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and I saw my siblings scatter across the nation because there wasn't opportunities here. Western Pennsylvania just was a struggling area, especially in the 80s and 90s. And I came back, and I settled in Beaver County, and I have 8 children myself now. And I want to see a Pennsylvania where they can thrive. And we have the abundance and natural resources to create an environment in Pennsylvania where we're not just competing, like the governor says. We ought to be talking about dominating. We should be dominating the markets in the northeastern part of the United States, if not the whole nation, to become the keystone of industry again in Pennsylvania. We have the resources to do that. But what we have really found, I think, as a policy committee over the course of the last year and a half, and today it had the same echoes, is Harrisburg keeps getting in the way. And frankly, you talk about energy policy, you talk about permitting, really what this is a collection of political malpractice over the course of the last, 60 or so years, where we just keep screwing it up to the point where you got to ask yourself, it's almost hard to screw it up as bad as Harrisburg has screwed it up with all the advantages that we have. But that's our job. That's our job, is to listen to you, stakeholders that are creating jobs, listen to you, farmers that are working, that put food on the table, take it back to Harrisburg and fix these issues so that we can enjoy these family-sustaining jobs, so that my kids and their generation can stay in Pennsylvania. So thank you for being here. Thank you for testifying. I truly appreciate it. Our next policy hearing takes place on September 19th in Tioga County. I think that's Thursday. In Tioga County, we'll be addressing the issue of human trafficking. Until then, this committee is adjourned.